So thank you for inviting me to speak here today. So I want to talk about a story that happened actually in 2016. Maybe Hans, who has heard about the story of the Dow? Only very few, so that means I have an interesting story to tell today. So if you think about a company, most people think about a legal structure and a hierarchy. So you have a boss, you have middle management, and you have some employees doing things. And that's how we typically think about when thinking about companies or organizations in general. And that's fine for many purposes. It's for bootstrapping something. In the beginning, you often need to start centralized for various reasons. But in the end, what you have here is just some contract relationships between those persons or parties. But there are some problems with this model. Like when you're starting to scale or having a lot of members in an organization, there is no way the head of this company or organization can know everything, or he has enough information to make good decisions. He of course tries to rely on the middle management and so on, but it still has flaws when it comes to information flow. The next thing which is also flawed is if this one person is corrupt or makes some big wrong decisions, he can screw up the whole company. And so in 2014, I joined the Ethereum Foundation and was part of the group who built the Ethereum protocol and the Ethereum client. So Ethereum is a blockchain-based protocol which allows for something we call smart contracts. And I just want to show you, make a very short introduction of this technology in order to understand what this means for organizations or what is possible now. Let's see, I have a bit of a problem going to the next slide. Maybe you can help me. The next one. Thank you. So if you think about blockchain and smart contracts, it's the easiest visualization I could come up with. You know, maybe Bitcoin, it's just a blockchain, the ledger of storing who's allowed to spend how many Bitcoins. Ethereum allows you to have something we call smart contracts where you have some rules, meaning if this happens, then that. If this event is true, then make a payment. And these smart contracts are really encoded into the whole blockchain, meaning every node is storing it. It's 100% decentralized. So in the case of Ethereum, there's something between 10 or 20,000 nodes, and they all store those smart contracts. And if someone makes a transaction to an address of a smart contract, the code gets executed. So, and this is happening completely autonomously, doesn't need anyone to do anything except of sending a transaction to the network. So that's the one important tool we need. We need a smart contract-capable blockchain. The next piece, you can go to the next slide, is public and private keys. Those are the two main ingredients. Everybody can generate on their smartphone or on their laptop a public-private key pair. And what this means, we have a private key which you store very securely, nobody should ever see this, and you use this to sign messages, and someone else can then see it, the signed message, and derive your public key from it. So a public key, you could compare this to something like the number of your bank account. You can give it to everybody, and they can technically give you money. They don't need to know your private key, but a private key is needed in order to spend money or to do something. So you could say it's something like a login into the blockchain system. That's why I also think blockchains are secure by default, because you're always using private key infrastructure to do anything. You don't need a username, you don't need a password, only your private key. And those two ingredients make up a blockchain system that people can interact with each other on this decentralized network. So this is the foundation of what I'm going to talk about. So please, next slide. And the next. So what is a DAO? A DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. It lives on a blockchain. It has no head. There are no people managing it, but it is able to hold capital or money and spend it. And it is usually made out of a lot of different people. They don't even know each other, and they can be completely anonymous. So you could say it's just computer code in a blockchain that incentivizes people to self-organize. You could think about Bitcoin being a DAO. Nobody actually leads Bitcoin. It's just there. Everybody can use it and interact. It incentivizes miners to create blocks. And Ethereum smart contracts allow for much more complex DAOs with much more rules. So can you go to the next slide, please? So this is just an overview of how you could think about this. Just look at the left side, please. If you think about organizations as capital, and you have either humans at the center or automation at the center, or automation at the edges or humans at the edges. You can think about boring old organizations having humans at the top and humans at the edges performing it. If you go to robots, there you still have humans at the centers talking about what they should do, but automation at the edges. Those are the robots. If you go to AI, technically it would be possible to have automation at the edges as well as at the center. If you think about DAOs, you would have humans at the edges, but automation at the center. So you eliminate the head of this organization. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is another way of framing it, how that DAO work we created in 2016. So in 2016, we said now we have this tool. 2015 was the launch of the Ethereum mainnet. We now have the tool to build a decentralized autonomous organization. So we wrote a smart contract which technically did this. A DAO smart contract which was supposed to securely hold Ether, which did track who did have how many DAO tokens, define the governance, the voting process, all of this. And then you had to have other companies or persons, we called them contractor, who would say, I want to have some money out of this DAO. I make a proposal that the DAO token owners need to vote on. And in this contract code, I define my business model, my operational parameters, maybe payment terms, monthly payments, daily payments, how I pay it back, and all of this those kind of things can be put into a smart contract. And this would made up the DAO. So it's actually a very simple contract. People can put virtual currency in our case, Ether, and would get DAO tokens out. And with this money, they can decide what to do with it. Everybody can make a proposal, and they can vote with their DAO tokens where the money should go. That's technically what this DAO is. Next slide, please. So this was more successful than we thought. This was in the beginning just a little side project, not even the main thing we did. I come from the company Slock.it, and that's actually not our focus. So we just did this. We thought, well, we have about 5,000 followers on social media. If everybody of them puts like $1,000 in, you would have something like 5 million. That's like what we thought about. But to our big surprise, within 4 weeks, the DAO raised $150 million. This was in 2016 the largest crowdfunding ever at this point. By now there are larger ones, but in 2016 this was the largest crowdfunding ever happened. $150 million. And because of this, actually, the Ether price went up. And so in the end, it was about $220, $230 million. And this completely without anyone controlling it, except of a large group of people. So I had no control over those funds. I had no control over the smart contract. I could just look at it. And this was a very scary time, because I didn't know what would happen with it. Everybody could make a proposal. Like even some criminals could say, I want to fund some terrorism, and let's see if they fund me. And technically, I couldn't do anything against it. There was no legal framework, so there was no GmbH, LLC, or Inc. or anything behind it. This was just living with code is law, meaning whatever happens on a blockchain just happens, and the blockchain is the law, and nobody can change this. So this was an exciting time. We even made it to the front page of the New York Times Sunday editions, and everybody was talking about it. And this was the beginning of the story. So now we had all this money in, and people said, now we have a democratic organization. We can go to the next slide, please. And actually, it was not that democratic. So if you look at how the token holders are distributed, there were about 23,499 addresses. We don't know how many people were behind it, because behind one address could be many people, for example, an exchange, or there could be one guy having a lot of addresses. So we estimated something like 15,000 people participated in this, what I would call experiment, which was way bigger than we ever thought. But you also see it's not that like they all have equal voting. It's not a democracy, it's a plutocracy. If you put more money in, you can have a bigger rate with your voting. So you can say where the money goes. So it was kind of a mix between the wisdom of the crowd and still those, we call them whales, like those who put a lot of money in, who would make some due diligence and check those proposals if they are good or not. So this lasted, so the crowdfunding lasted only for 4 weeks. After that, there was this very intense time because nobody was managing it. Everybody was speaking about flaws, maybe what could be done better. Everybody was making proposals and discussing on social media, but nobody was leading the project because we said after open sourcing the code, we were basically saying that's not our business anymore. That's the community, that's your 15,000 people, whatever you do with it. But we made a mistake. There was a mistake in the smart contract. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So in the smart contract, I will not go into technical details. A hacker was able to temporarily try to steal about $50 million into his own DAO. And then a very crazy time started. We call this Dow Wars, because other one saw how it worked and tried to steal the rest. And then a Robin Hood group came, people who just want to give the money back to the investors, saying, well, we steal the remaining 100 million, so we can give it back to the people. And then they tried to hack into the DAO of the hacker, and he tried to hack back, and it was like millions of dollars. You could see how this going around, but you could do nothing. It was on an immutable blockchain. It was based on a smart contract. You can just look how the money went out, how they was attacking each other. Long story short, after a while, the community discussed this. We, of course, tried to find a solution for this. And the only viable solution was something in the blockchain world, we call this a hard fork, meaning the whole system needed to upgrade in order to give those people their money back. So you could compare this with if you have an app which failed and iOS needs to make an update in order for your app to work again. Something like this. So it's very, very hard to convince Apple to make an update because of your app. And today, it wouldn't work anymore. Like many other projects which have failed and lost a lot of money, and they also asked for hard forks, and nobody did it again. So this was a one-time thing, which hopefully never happens again. But the good side of the story is everybody got their money back. This was the good news. So it was very relieving for us that we were not guilty of people losing that much funds. So this was the bad end of the story. You can go to the next slide, please. So is this quote I like, you never know how far you can go until you've gone too far. And we certainly have gone too far with the DAO. It was way too early for its time. The technology was not ready. Smart contracts, smart languages such as Solidity was not ready for doing such a big thing. But it was a very big learning experience, not only personal. Of course, during those about 8 weeks, you know what it means to go to stress, get a lot of press contact, and explain to those people what's happening, and nobody understands why you can't do anything. It's a smart contract, you explain blockchain, how they work, and so on, what is a hard fork. So it was a stressful time, but as the Ethereum community, from their point of view, of course, it was also a stressful time, but there was a lot of learning. What is a hard fork? How does it work? We learned, for example, there are now 2 chains. There's Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. Ethereum Classic is the chain which didn't update, which said we stick with it. We want to be immutable. We don't change. And so we have kind of 2 communities now. And we learned a lot more about smart contract security, and if you went to the conferences after that happened, everybody was just talking about smart contract security. How can we get this secure? How can we make code which is perfect, because it never changes? So this was the beginning, the DAO. If you look at what happened after this, like after 2016, especially in 2017, you had this ICO craze. Everybody doing ICO, raising tons of funds. We didn't do this. And if you speak to them, most of them wanted to make a proposal to the DAO, but said, well, the DAO doesn't exist, and we don't want to make a new one because it's way too dangerous. So for security reasons, we do an ICO, because it's way simpler. It's not very complex. Of course, you can do so much more on a chain than just doing a simple, stupid ICO, but now we're entering into another time, maybe you can go to the next slide, of, I would say, the Dow frameworks are starting to come up again. ICO time, for me, is more or less over. But if you look at, for example, Colony or DAOstack or Aragon, those are projects taking this idea to the next level. They've built user interfaces, very modular smart contracts. You have formal verification of contracts now. We do security audits of those contracts. And there's a lot of work which went into making this secure again. And we see already the new smaller DAOs launching, nothing as big as their DAO, but still you see again DAOs coming up. Completely decentralized organizations where nobody is directly in charge, often without any legal structure. Some put a GmbH behind it or an LLC, but it's actually more complicated. But we see this coming up again. So what does it mean for maybe you and your organizations? Just think about what it would mean if your organization is so decentralized that it can automatically scale, that your users maybe also become your investors. You don't really distinguish anymore between people putting money into your project and actually using it. It becomes one big community. And this can really scale globally very, very quickly, which a traditional organization has a very hard time to do. So I believe this is the next steps we are taking now, from having this boring old organizations today to something which scales much better and has much more involvement. And due to blockchain, we can do those value transfers within seconds for a very low cost. So at the end of the talk, I just want to give you some other ideas what you can do with a DAO. Maybe you can go to the next slide, please. And the next. Some principles and algorithms which are possible. For example, one thing is quadratic voting. That you don't just vote one vote, or one person, one vote. You can say the costs is equal to the number of votes squared. So that you can say, I'm getting, for example, 10 votes per month. And if something is very, very important, let's say 9 votes, because it's easier, 9 votes per month. If something is very, very important to me, I save them and just vote on this one issue. The weight of this is 3, because it's the logarithm of 9. But you can save this, and you can mathematically prove that you get much better results with quadratic voting than with normal voting. That's just one thing you can do in such a DAO. You can go to the next slide, please. Then another one is continuous organizations. You don't do fundraising like seed round, Series A, B, C, D, E, then IPO. You can have a continuous fundraising. They just say there is one curve defining the buy price, one is defining the sell price, and you can have some fancy algorithm how they go up over time or down. And this is not time, this is the number of tokens. It's similar to the number of shares of your company, for example. And so if more people buy in, the price goes up. If people sell, the price goes down. And this green area is the money you have available as a company to spend and build a product. And you can define how the sell price function or the buy price function operate. But what you technically have is you have an organization where at any point in time, people can put money in. You don't need to make those discrete funding rounds anymore, which is also much better than what we have today. Those are all stuff you can do today in a decentralized autonomous organization, completely automated, without any paperwork. Go to the next slide, please. Or it's actually the last slide. So there is still, we have already quite some history since 2016, but there's a lot of work to be done in the future. That's why I like this famous quote, Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every hour. And if you have looked or followed a bit what's happening in the blockchain space and not have been distracted by speculation and ICOs, you have seen that more and more developers coming in, building awesome solutions for all of this. So the builders really have done so much work in the last 1 and 2 years that now it's actually ready for you and other users to take their fruits and use them in your organization. Thank you very much for your attention. So we do have time for some question, I hope. I didn't look at the time.
Thank you. Wow, so many questions. What an experience.
Yes.
But I guess I wanted to ask a little bit about governance of the DAOs. Can you speak to kind of on-chain versus off-chain and some of the experiments maybe that are happening right now?
Yeah, so what you mean is also on-chain governance. So the first DAO was extremely simple. This has also technical limits. This was all I could put into one contract. And the first DAO had a very simple, straightforward governance saying, everybody has put money in. According to how much money he put in, he got tokens out, and you can vote with those tokens. Everybody can make a proposal. There was a 2-week voting time. Within this time, you need to vote. If then you have more yes than no, and if you have more than 20% of the tokens have voted at all, so a minimal quorum, then it would be accepted. This was the very simple rules of the first DAO. Now you have much more complex DAO, where, for example, prevent that in the last second the outcome shifts, like someone waits for the last second, then puts all his money in, so that the time when the voting is ending is getting longer and longer, for example, until for a certain period of time the outcome doesn't change. You have much more algorithms now to make the voting better. But to your question between off-chain and on-chain. So on-chain means you use your private keys to do a vote. Off-chain is basically communication on social media or in meetings and so on. So that's not really controlled by the smart contract at all. And if you look at Ethereum itself as a blockchain project, it does not have any formalized on-chain governance. It's just people speaking on social media. And in the end, this puts a lot of weight on the developers because they need to find out what is the sentiment I see on Reddit and Twitter and so on, and what do I think they want. You can, of course, make a proposal, but there are so many proposals by so many people that it technically or practically ends up the developers making those decisions. That's not ideal. But it's also, so far, has proved to be very resilient. The bad thing with on-chain governance is, someone could come, buy 51% of all the tokens and make a proposal to send 100% to him. And he has the voting power to do so. So the first DAO had as an exit this was actually the function where we had the bug in it, that people can say, I leave before it happens. So if I see something like this happening, I can take my money and leave. This function actually had the flaw that the hack was possible. But this is still complicated, but I think on-chain governance is still the way to go. And you can have it completely anonymous, that everybody can participate without any know your customer. If you want to do one person, one vote, then you need to somehow identify those people, need a centralized organization doing this. So one person, one vote is strictly spoken not really possible on blockchain unless you have a centralized organization doing it. I hope this kind of answers the question. There, and then here's also one.
Oh yeah, I already have the microphone, so I have actually two questions. First one, what was the biggest single investment in the first DAO? And if you know, maybe, do you know who it was? And the second question, I think you kind of answered already, but since the idea of the first DAO was that a lot of people can invest via the blockchain, but in the end of the day, even the code should be law, they all get their money back, and you actually were able to manage that. Where can I actually trust these kind of organizations when you actually can get into the code and more or less completely change it so everybody can get the money back?
So first question, we do not know who it was. The exact number, the biggest one, I don't know, but it was something around $15 or $20 million. But I don't know who it was. The second question is the more interesting one. This is debate about, is a blockchain immutable or is it not? In the end, I would say yes, it is immutable. Even the Ethereum blockchain was not changed. There was an update where people could opt in. The old version still exists, like Ethereum Classic. You cannot really kill a blockchain. It just sticks like this. But in the end, it's the users who decide what they use. So, and that's something, even with Bitcoin, if Bitcoin would make a hard fork now, anybody can do one. If most of the users follow this hard fork and use this chain now, then the coin in this chain is a higher value than in the old one. Nobody can stop you from doing it. So they actually, we found out what is blockchain governance. It means everybody can just make an upgrade on a hard fork. It just needs to convince a lot of people to follow him and use this instead of the old one. So this is how blockchain governance works practically. So yes, you need to trust the chain you're using that such things won't happen, or that they won't happen in a bad way, meaning they only happen in exceptional circumstances, redeeming money for people, but not really censoring your transaction or something like this. I would be much more suspicious when you look at Facebook's Libra chain and others. There you have a couple of validators, about 100, and there the governance could take legal action against them to censor something. Technically possible. With Ethereum, since all the validators, which are the miners, are anonymous, you cannot really do this. So Ethereum is, I would say, very censorship resistant. And you saw after the DAO, we had the parity multisig hack, for example, 2 times. They lost much more money than we did. And nobody did hard fork, because this was like out of beta phase. Ethereum was more mature now, and they didn't think it was worth it to do the hard fork. So I think it's very, very, very unlikely that we ever see a hard fork again, except there is something like 20% of all Ether is gone, or something very system-relevant, catastrophic event. Yeah. There was one question.
Yeah, here. So I don't want to cite Steve Jobs, but he said, don't listen to the customer. So imagine we are designing together, like at Kickstarter or something like that, extended together a product. Then we have kind of a democracy of those people possibly that are investing, that are also consumers of that product. My question is, are the products or the business processes, are there types that are better suited for this kind of democracy and others that are not so well suited? Because we all know feature creep in products. So how can I actually be sure that people are satisfied about what people actually voted on?
Yeah, it depends completely on your project. Like, I'm the CEO of Slock.it. We have about 35 people, and it's a very classical hierarchy. And I think for what we do, this works best. But if you want to do something where you have much more community involvement or public infrastructure, for example, then this might work much better. And the question is also, what is decided here? For the first DAO, this was macro management. This was just sending a certain amount of money to this project, not micromanaging anything what they would do there. So Colony, for example, they try to also get more into the micromanagement. It's a project where you have reputation-based voting and where you try to have maybe a large group of developers worldwide and do some projects. So it's very dependent on the project. The interesting thing, the takeaway from today is it's possible to have such an organization, worldwide, decentralized, without any head. And this was not possible before we had blockchain with money. This is the new takeaway. Where to use it, it's actually a really interesting question, but there are many companies who found use cases for it, yeah. But not for, I agree with you, not for all the product development decisions on a micromanagement level. That's not what it is used for.
So first of all, the story never gets old. Thanks again for reminding how crazy it was and how far we've come and didn't die. But the curious thing is really, we still today, if we want to build a community-driven, but an organization that raises funds to fund real-world assets, then we very much have to have a governance model that also works in the real world or the old world. And how to bridge those two worlds, it's still something I don't see it.
There are some who try to bridge it, like Open Law, for example. They have at least a framework where you make a DAO and those shares or those tokens are actually shares in the LLC company in the US. So there are lawyers who try to make it work.
Yeah, but the thing I'm most struggling with is not that there are smart contracts that can actually talk to a tax data backend, but actually the people that also in their mindset still have the old governance structures and they want to see a CEO, and if they don't see the CEO, they're like, that's not something serious, but we need those people. Do you have experience how to move them forward?
That's a good question. So if someone would ask me if I would think if there would be no hack, if the DAO would have been successful or not, I really don't know. So it could have been that nobody is voting, for example, total voting apathy. They don't do anything. So I don't know if the DAO would have been successful, and the DAOs we have seen recently who started, they are also, I would not call any of them super successful. They started small, let's see how they develop, but exactly what you said, people need to take responsibility, they need to have information to make informed decisions, and often people use delegates. They just say you have a delegate and he votes for you, but then you need a lot of delegates, otherwise he has all the power. So yes, I think those problems are practically not solved yet. Of course, we have theories about how you could structure a DAO, but I would like to see one DAO really working in production at large scale, and I've not seen it yet. So that's why I hope with those frameworks, such as Colony, DAOstack, Aragon, that we will see this in the future. But I completely agree. This was an experiment, and I don't know if it would have worked out. Yeah.
Last question.
Could you use a DAO to completely replace government and voting?
I think technically I would say yes, but there are still problems such as privacy. This is happening on a public blockchain, and even though you just use your address, in the end, with some analysis, it might be possible in the future to find out who's behind this address, and it's all very public. So if you want to have voting where you don't know who's voting for what, then it's more difficult. There are also other problems, such as people paying you to vote in a certain way. Because you can easily write a smart contract which pays you some money if you can prove that your key has voted in a certain way. So it's very easy to pay for votes. So those are some practical problems we still need to overcome before I would use this in the public sector. But in general, I would like to see a more formalized and on-chain governance also in the public sector. But I would still say we are very early with this. So not on the federal level at least, maybe in the city. Yeah. Was this the last question or one more? I don't know.
One very quick one.
Okay, last question.
Is there a DAO casino? Could you implement it? And if not, would it be fun to do it?
I think someone has done it already. I'm not interested in gambling, but I've read about it. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention.